really delighted to welcome you here today to this session about nudging to support parents in the digital age. I'm Owain Service. I'm the former Managing Director of the Behavioural Insights team. I'm also a visiting professor at the University of Sheffield. But more importantly, I'm a father of two small children, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. So I'm hoping to learn a lot that I can instantly go and implement this evening. Today's session focuses on parenting and how we can use technology to assist parents to build effective home learning environments for their children. And we've got three fantastic speakers, all of whom have a very different take on this question. So I'll do a very, very quick intro, but then hand over to the main event. So first up, we have Professor Stephanie Carlson from the University of Minnesota. Stephanie's going to provide an overview of some of the latest academic research, especially around the subject of development of executive control and other important life skills that you develop early in life especially. Then we're going to hear from Fionnuala O'Reilly, who leads the Behavioural Insights team's work on early years education. Fionnuala's going to describe some work that has been run within the Behavioural Insights team and touch upon a lot of the current thinking in this area, especially from a policy perspective. And then we're going to hear from Sue McMillan, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Mumsnet. I think everyone in here who is from the UK will know that Mumsnet is the biggest parenting website. If you're from overseas, you might not know that Mumsnet has 10 million unique monthly users every month. So it's quite a big deal in the UK and the kind of forum in which a lot of parents get their advice. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stephanie, who's going to kick off the session.
Okay, thank you, Owen. So I'm delighted to be here with you this afternoon and to be a part of this panel. I'm going to be speaking with you today about my research on executive function. And before we get started, I want to give you an idea of what that means. My colleague Phil Zalazzo and I developed a tablet-based application, an app, called the Minnesota Executive Function Scale. And it measures executive function skills from ages 2 and up. And it's nationally normed in the U.S. with over 35,000 individuals. And it's now provided to educators through our company called Reflection Sciences. So it's a virtual card sorting game. And so you're given a card like this one on the bottom and asked to sort it according to a rule. And there are several challenge or difficulty levels. So here we see we're at level 3, which is for 3-year-olds. And the rule is to play the shape game. So if you're playing the shape game, and if it's a butterfly, then you would put it in the butterfly box. Get ready for the next trial. Now here's a frog. So you'd put it in the frog box. So pretty simple, right? Well, after a few trials like this, we change the rules. And we say, okay, we're not going to play the shape game anymore. Now we're going to play the color game. So then you flip the card, and this frog with a blue background, which you would have normally sorted into the frog box, playing by the old rule, now you need to reconstrue this card and think about it differently, not as a frog, but instead as a blue thing, and sort it to the right. So this is probably, you're thinking, fairly simple for you to shift your thinking in this way. But it's extraordinarily difficult for young preschoolers. So what do they tend to do? They tend to continue playing by the old rule, as if nothing changed. And this is a failure of executive function. So there are a number of overlapping terms that are used to describe executive function, such as willpower, self-control, perseverance, self-regulation. And really what we're talking about here are the neurocognitive skills that have a clear brain basis that we use to deliberately and consciously control our attention, our thought, emotion, and ultimately our behavior. So if you think back to that Minnesota Executive Function Scale that I showed you at the beginning, to play the game well, what you have to do is keep the current rule in mind. That's your current goal, if you will. And you have to hold that in mind. That's working memory. You also have to resist the habit of playing by the old rule, as well as any other distractions that might be happening in the environment. That's inhibitory control. And then lastly, you have to reflect on the fact that the rules keep changing and that there are multiple ways to play this game. And that's cognitive flexibility. So when we examine the development of executive function from age 2 to 70 in this case, we can see and trace the very steep rise of executive function skills in the early years. And it doesn't peak until one's early to mid-20s. And then unfortunately, on average, it does begin to decline after one's mid-20s. Don't worry, though, because this is not necessarily the case for adults and older adults who remain mentally active. Executive function is correlated with academic achievement. So this is a well-established finding at this point. I'm showing here the correlations between 3 different measures of executive function. Doesn't quite matter what they are, but these are 3 commonly used measures, and we're looking at the correlations between performance on those measures and math and reading achievement in children ages 5 to 17. And the correlations here range from 0.3 to 0.6, and all were significant. Here we're seeing the performance of preschool children on a math achievement test, and as a function of their performance on 4 different executive function measures. And in each case, the better the child did on executive function, the higher their math achievement scores. So another way to think about this is that the higher a child's executive function is, by the time they enter primary school, the more prepared they are to achieve well, particularly in math. Poverty is a serious risk factor for executive function skills. The amount of time in poverty predicts lower executive function skills by age 4. And with new measures, we're able to detect socioeconomic status disparities in executive function in even younger children. So to summarize, research shows that executive function predicts learning and achievement, and as well as success in life in other areas, including health, wealth, and well-being into adulthood. And the good news is that with intervention and practice, we can improve executive function skills. There are a number of promising interventions for executive function. Some of them involve old-fashioned games, such as Simon Says and Red Light, Green Light, if you recall those from childhood. Those were actually exercising your executive function skills, whether you knew it or not. Books that challenge children's working memory skills, and even mindfulness practice for children, so including belly breathing and yoga. But we're here today to ask, is there a place for technology and media to improve executive function skills? Some of you might have heard about Vroom. It's an app for parents. It's a free downloadable app from the Bezos Family Foundation. And it provides a daily tip that is personalized and to be appropriate for your child's age, of things that you can do to help build these essential life skills. And it also includes the brainy background. So that's sort of the scientific background or scientific explanation for why this activity helps build your child's brain. But increasingly, children have their own devices that they're using. It's not just about parents and how technology can help them, but what about children who have their own devices? These are results from a survey study that we recently conducted in the Minneapolis metropolitan region, where I live and work. And I was surprised to learn that over 20% of children under the age of 3 have their own tablets, according to their parents. And the numbers increase with age thereafter. So how can we put these tools to the best use if they're already in children's hands? Well, we know from a lot of research that educational media can be highly beneficial. To illustrate, one example would be the work of Sesame Workshop. In fact, Sesame Street devoted an entire season to the development of executive function skills, teaching Cookie Monster strategies for controlling his cookie urges. I encourage you to check it out. So here's our theory of change. In addition to, or along with toys, media can inspire imagination in kids, and media figures can inspire imagination. Imagination, in turn, helps to promote language and reflection. These are the essential ingredients for the development of executive function, which in turn, as I've showed you, is really important for being ready for school, ready and motivated for school-based learning. Play might not be completely as simple as it appears. However, as Albert Einstein quipped, understanding physics is child's play when it comes to understanding child's play. But we're trying anyway. And so one of the reasons that children really struggle with self-control is that they become so immersed in situations that they find it hard to disengage or step back from a situation so that they can make a more reasoned and more flexible choice or decision about what to do. And here's where pretending can be especially helpful. By imagining how things could be different in the pretend world, children might become better able to think about how things could be seen differently in the real world as well. So this psychological distance is like taking a mental step back so that you can see the situation more fully and reflect on that situation and reason from your goals rather than from the heat of the moment. That's what psychological distance can do for us. And pretend play is one really natural vehicle for gaining psychological distance in young children because they spend 2/3 of their waking hours in pretend anyway. So we decided to take advantage of this. And my colleagues and students and I conducted a series of studies that led us to this phenomenon which we call the Batman effect. And it's performing tasks at a more advanced level when imagining you're someone more competent than the self, such as Batman. We decided to see what would happen if we asked children to pretend to be somebody else, a highly competent and familiar media figure, while performing a challenging executive function task. So here is my student Amanda Grinnell, and she's with a 5-year-old girl who decided to pretend to be Elsa from the movie Frozen while performing the Minnesota Executive Function Scale. So this is the tablet game that she has in front of her. And she's wearing the red cape that Elsa wears in the movie as a kind of a reminder, as a prop. In the self-immersed condition, the experimenter suggested to children to think about themselves and to think, where should you put the card? So remember, it's a virtual card sorting task. So she would say, where should you put the card? In the third-person condition, it's a little more distanced from the self, where she encouraged children to think about themselves in the third person, using their own name. So, for example, she would say, where should Stephanie put the card? And in the exemplar condition, children impersonated a favorite media character and put on a prop, such as a cape, and did the same measure, but then the experimenter would say, for example, where should Elsa put the card if the child was pretending to be Elsa? And as you can see, children perform better as distance from the self increased. And they performed the best in the exemplar and impersonation condition. This was especially true for 5-year-olds in the study. In another experiment, we asked children to persist and persevere at an important but boring task. So we gave them this computer task on a laptop and asked them to do it, and we said, and we placed a very tempting iPad right next to the child, and right next to the laptop. We said, it's very important that you work as long as you can on this task, but it can get boring. So when you want to, you can play on this iPad. So try to imagine what a typical 4 to 6-year-old child would do in this situation. And you're right, they spent most of their time on the iPad. However, as distance from the self increased, they persisted more on the work task. They worked harder when they were pretending to be somebody else than in any other condition. And this was true for both the 4- and 6-year-olds. In the final experiment that I'll tell you about, we wondered if this same simple strategy could help children with their emotional self-regulation. So we presented children with a very tempting toy, like this remote control car, and said, you can play with it by unlocking this box. It was placed in a clear box. You can unlock the box with this set of keys that I'm going to give you, and then you can play with the toy. And so here are the keys. I'm going to leave the room for a little bit to do some work, and I'll be back in a bit. Unbeknownst to the child, however, none of the keys worked. So it was a futile effort, and it became very frustrating for the children. I should mention that they heard audio prompts throughout the 10 minutes to remind them how they were supposed to be thinking about themselves during this task. So if they were in the immersed condition, this voice would say, how are you feeling? If they were in the third-person condition, the voice would say, how is Owain feeling? And in the exemplar impersonation condition, the voice would say, how is Batman feeling? After 10 minutes, we returned to the room and said, oh my goodness, we've made a terrible mistake. Here is the correct set of keys. And so all ended well. Children were able to open the box and play with the toy at the end. What we found here was that for children lower in executive function, as measured by independent tests, they significantly benefited from this intervention, where they were significantly less frustrated as distance from the self increased. In fact, in the exemplar condition, where they were pretending to be somebody else, they were no different from their higher executive function peers in terms of overt frustration. So next I'm going to show you a few videos to give you a sense of how children under these different conditions reacted to the frustrating task. This child is in the self-immersed condition. And the video is not playing. It's supposed to just automatically play.
Okay, well, while this is being done, I'll just do something which I should have done at the very beginning, which is to remind you that if you've got any questions, you can put them up on the Slido app. And remember, we're in the Abbey room.
How are you feeling? May please stop saying that because it's kind of getting in my head a little bit.
So, how are you feeling? Hearing that 10 times was while in the face of this frustrating task, was not helping matters. This child is in the exemplar condition, and she chose to pretend to be Rapunzel. So she coped with the situation by asking herself, how is Rapunzel feeling? And then she goes back to work. At the end, we asked all children if they had become frustrated at all during the sessions.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel frustrated at all while you were working on that?
No.
No?
Just like Batman never gets frustrated.
Yeah?
Batman never gets frustrated. I've watched it on Netflix. Look at it.
So media is not all bad, right? They're learning a few good things. And I thought it was interesting that Maya Palmer, who's a reporter and deputy editor for the Financial Times, caught wind of this phenomenon, the Batman effect, and said, I can confirm from personal experience that this is true. It included a photograph of her son doing his homework in a Batman costume. So the idea is that by creating psychological distance, pretending to be a competent figure can be a simple nudge to help improve children's important and essential executive function skills. It's a very simple suggestion that can work for a lot of children, and they're already quite familiar with a lot of these characters, and we've proven, at least in a laboratory context, that performance does significantly improve on these challenging tasks with a simple suggestion. I think this Batman effect is consistent with what we're learning about the importance of having a growth mindset. This sort of fake it till you make it idea is consistent with thinking that positively about one's own growth and one's own abilities versus thinking of them as fixed and sort of set in stone. So it's the idea that I can learn anything I want to, persevering through frustration, enjoying challenges, learning from failure, being inspired by other people's success, and ultimately believing that my effort and attitude determine everything. I'll leave you with one final example. This is a child who spontaneously channeled Elsa from Frozen to manage her own frustration during this task. The cold never bothered me anyway. That's especially apt coming from Minneapolis. Well, thank you all for your attention, and I'd like to thank my colleagues Angela Duckworth and Ethan Cross, and my students Rachel White, Emily Prager, Amanda Grinnell, Catherine Schaefer, Julie Weisserova, and Lauren Eels, who all assisted with this research. Thank you very much.
So the questions are starting to come in. We're going to do Q&A at the end after we've heard from Fionnuala, who's now going to give us some of her reflections.
Great. So thank you very much. I'm Fionnuala, and I head up the early years brief at the Behavioural Insights team. I'm just going to talk for 5 minutes or so today to give you a flavour of some of our work in this space and how we're using behavioural science to support parents in an ever-increasingly digital world. I think the takeaway message of today is maybe not that technology is bad or that we need to keep iPads away from children, but more so, and as Stephanie has shown, it's really prevalent in homes today, and so it's about how we can manage it so that it doesn't crowd out some of the more important activities like pretend play, as we just saw, but that we use it as something to channel all the good activities. So I'm sure you can all relate to going on the internet and not being quite sure of what you're looking for. It can feel like a bit of a minefield. And for busy parents who are, maybe time poor, when they go on the internet to find information, it can be very difficult for them to find evidence-based and objective information. And this very much chimes with a lot of the qualitative research that we've been doing over the years. We hear that parents often feel time poor, so this feeling of constantly being rushed off their feet, which can lead to them having limited bandwidth to really reflect on where they're at, where their child is at developmentally, or even just to be able to come up with activities and games to occupy their children. And even when they do have a bit more time, it can be very difficult for them to know if what they're doing is the right things, and sometimes the internet can exacerbate that, because it almost gives us too much information. It can be quite difficult to decipher what's good and what's bad. So we have been reflecting on these behavioural barriers for the past couple of years, and we've been developing and testing some programs to try to tackle these issues that parents have. Some of the common behavioural insights that we use, I'll just describe some of them quickly. Using simple and actionable information, and I can't overstate just how important this is, giving parents plain English, to the point information. I think we're always a bit surprised at just how effective making it easy is in some of our work. Using advanced planning. So we use what are called implementation intentions, and these are plans that help parents to specify the where, what, and when, where, what, and how of their actions, so that when the time does come around to do that behaviour, they've primed themselves to do it, and therefore they're a lot more likely to engage in that behaviour. Using social norms, so the idea of highlighting positive behaviours amongst the majority of parents in the hope that we can shift parents who maybe aren't doing them towards that behaviour. And using timely prompts, so this is just about thinking about when parents are most receptive to information and giving it to them at those times of day. So just to give you an example of a project where we've been able to test some of these things out, Tips by Text is a project we have ongoing at the moment, and it's funded by the Education Endowment Foundation and DFE, so a huge thank you to them. The programme was originally developed in the US by Professor Susanna Loeb and colleagues over there, and it's shown a lot of promise. So we have adapted it to the UK context, and we've aligned it with the Early Years Foundation Stage Profile. We're testing it in 120 schools this academic year. It's just going live at the moment as pupils return to school. And essentially, as the name might suggest, it's a text message programme. So we're sending parents 3 text messages a week with very simple, concise information on activities that they can do at home with their young children. And I think what's crucial about this intervention is that all of the activities that we recommend are based around everyday things that happen in the household. So stuff like doing the laundry, putting the cups and the plates away after dinner, preparing food for dinner, getting ready for bed. So all of these things that in most households happen already. And we're almost just tacking these little activities onto them so that they become developmental activities. So to give you an example, I might have mentioned parents receive 3 text messages a week from us. The first one is a fact message, and this introduces the skill to be built of that week. So in this example, we're building addition and subtraction. And then on a Wednesday, parents get a tip message, which gives a very direct or simple activity that they can do at home with their child. So this one is about counting the socks as you're doing the laundry. And then finally, on a Friday, they get a growth message, which is designed to kind of reinforce the theme of that week and give parents ideas for how they can continue on with that in future weeks and months. So you're probably thinking that text messages are really the tip of the icebergs in terms of technological advances, and certainly they are. Someone recently said to me that text messages are very 90s, and that's probably true, but we find that they're quite a good way of communicating with parents, particularly when you have schools involved. And it's because a lot of schools use texting platforms already. It's one of these very scalable interventions if proven to be successful because the infrastructure is already there. But just to say, some of the stuff that we're thinking about going forward is, I think there's a huge question about apps. There's something like 80,000 apps for parents on the App Store at the moment. It's very difficult for them to decipher what is an educational app or just digital candy. So we're certainly thinking about that question. I think there's a big question about screen time, and I know that Sue is going to touch on that in just a few moments. And then just to say about gadgets in the home as well, I recently read a newspaper article about Alexa reading bedtime stories to children, and I was a bit surprised, to say the least. But I think what we're thinking about is how we help parents to manage all of this technology. It's not necessarily that it's they shouldn't use it, but just be aware that it's one-to-one interaction that's maybe more important, and trying to encourage them not to crowd out some of these one-to-one interactions or some of the more traditional activities that children do, like pretend play or playing hide or seek or whatever it may be. So that's just a very quick overview of some of our work. So thank you for your attention. I'm very happy to take questions after Sue's talk.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to speak here today. As the slide said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Mumsnet. How many people in the room have heard of Mumsnet? Can I just get... Okay, so most of you. I'm here today to talk about how we think resources like Mumsnet can help empower parents to support their children. The first thing I want to say is this is our mission statement as a company. We want to make parents' lives easier, and we were founded nearly 20 years ago, so March 2000, just a little bit of background. So that makes us older than Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and I believe Google might well have still been in the garage when it was founded. I should say I'm not a founder. I actually am quite proud to say I was in my first year at university when it was founded, but please can nobody tweet that because my boss doesn't like it when I tell that story. So, but yeah, it was founded after our founder and CEO, Justine, went on a disastrous family holiday. She took her twin daughters, who were 1 year old at that time, on holiday to Florida, and by her own admission had chosen the wrong destination, the wrong time zone, the wrong resort, and she says the wrong children. Spent a lot of time thinking, well, if I could have already tapped into a network of parents who'd already worked out that taking 1 year olds to a jet lag zone don't mix, I would have saved myself a small fortune. So sure enough, she came back and set up Mumsnet. And this is our growth graph from back in 2000. And I was asked to kind of talk about some of the challenges we've faced through the years, and I think possibly, interestingly, the biggest one was probably just as you can see that growth chart start to take off around about the year 2006, when Gina Ford, who some people in the room may be familiar with, yeah, there's some knowing nods. If you don't know, she's a sort of, I guess, would be described as a strict parenting guru. And she took issue with what some people on Mumsnet were saying about her. And not really understanding the nature of the internet and forums and everything else, basically threatened to sue us, tried to shut us down. And that was all a very kind of tricky period. But I think what it also did was dramatically raise the profile of Mumsnet. David Cameron did a web chat on there soon after becoming Conservative Party leader. The 2010 general election became known as the Mumsnet election, and the rest is history, really. And we're at 10 million users a month, really. So I think in terms of challenge, that was a big one. But as our founder says, once you've gone through something like that and come out the other end in the way that we have, you're more confident in your ability to ride out further storms. We're obviously a campaigning organisation. Some of you may be aware. Our campaigns arise organically rather than by design. So they very much come out of what our users are talking about, what the problems are that they're facing on the talk boards, and then we'll turn them into campaigns. So we've done ones around... There's still a lot of concern about the way miscarriages are cared for in this country. People who've had miscarriages being put on wards with women who've just had children, and just insensitive treatment around sexualised kind of clothing of young girls, and so let girls be girls, and something around postnatal care and how we can improve that. Our current one, to just give you an idea of the kind of range of issues we go into, is actually around trying to encourage companies to publish their parental leave policies. So there's quite a lot of concern, especially among women in their kind of late 20s, early 30s, a big chunk of whom are starting to think about family, that actually it's really difficult when you go for an interview to ask a company about what their parental leave policies are. Because you feel that by asking that question you might be indicating that at some point in the future you're going to think about that, and therefore you're not going to get the job. And we found something like 90% of our users said this was something that they had feared. So we're running a campaign at the moment. Our CEO has just written to the chairs and CEOs of the top FTSE 100 companies and asked them all to publish their policies. We're lobbying government to try and make it a change. And we're seeing quite a lot of companies. Actually, we had a reply from one yesterday, a CEO yesterday, saying, "My God, I didn't realise we didn't do this. Of course, we'll do it immediately." So this is the kind of campaigns that we're running to try and go back to our original thing of making parents' lives easier. I guess to give you a little bit of an indication of what the kind of discussion is on Mumsnet. So, anyone who's a parent in the room will know that even for those of us with lots of support, parenting can feel pretty lonely at times. And time and time again, we see our users talking about how other users' responses help them cope. So, classic examples, middle of the night, trying to breastfeed, baby won't latch. You can start a conversation on Mumsnet and you'll have answers and what are called virtual cups of tea almost instantly. And not long after we started, this phrase, "am I being unreasonable?" Started to pop up repeatedly. And I think, the founders would say when they started it, they would anticipate it would all be about weaning or child development or sleep or the kind of classic things that come to your head when you think about Mumsnet. But actually what they found quite quickly was that a real common desire was to know whether one's own actions and feelings in stressful situations were in the bounds of normal or unhinged. And I have heard someone say, not sure it would be quite the same on a site for men, but let's just leave that there for now anyway, whether that's a uniquely female perspective. In terms of some of the most frequently asked questions on Mumsnet, lots of around the things you'd expect, so baby feeding and sleeping, preparing for school, child development, screen time, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But, these are the two that we've picked out as some recurring issues. Babies are difficult, screaming, what we call the OP, who's the starter of a thread, feels defeated and miserable. And I think where you really see Mumsnet come into its own is that users very quickly respond with three things. They respond with suggestions on what's causing it, colic, allergy, tongue tie. They respond with suggestions on actions. So have you thought about health, talking to the health visitor? Have you talked about pushing for a referral? Have you been to the GP? And I think probably maybe the most importantly, they respond with sympathy. It does get better. And my personal favourite and mantra as a mum of a 2-year-old, this too shall pass, which still have to bear in mind on a common basis. The mother-in-law one is, I'm sure, the one that made you all laugh, but this is a very common issue discussed on Mumsnet. So how do you create and maintain boundaries with even the most well-meaning of family members? And it's about users who've been there and done that, supporting others, backing up the original poster, telling them that they're not being unreasonable, making suggestions, involve your partner, have a clear conversation, that kind of thing. And then I guess one of the other things I wanted to talk about, is I guess sometimes you hear this sense that does it cause a problem because of a sense that you end up in a situation where there's mum shaming, people feel judged as a result of it. And I think I just want to say a few things about that. First of all, if you don't think that happens in real life off the internet, then you've obviously never been a parent. I can again think of many experiences of my own where people said, "Oh, that's very brave of you to have your child in that baby Bjorn. Are you not worried about their hips?" And things like that. But also we do take that very seriously, and we take our moderation very seriously. The community self-polices in many situations. The fact that it's anonymous means that when somebody goes on and says something, and some people might come in and say, "Oh God, I can't believe you've done that." Others will say, "Hang on a minute, me too." But we also put a lot of thought into our moderation. We've got a team of specialist paid moderators who work morning to night, 7 days a week. And unlike many other networks, our moderators look at every single report and, crucially, I think, take the decisions in context. Our talk guidelines are clear, and we very much believe we are a facilitator, and the fundamental way in which Mumsnet supports parents is by enabling them to talk to each other, and so we want to keep communication flowing as much as possible, but we will balance that with that first slide, an understanding of our mission, that we are here to make parents' lives easier, and when we don't think that's happening, we'll use our discretion to delete posts to stay in keeping with that aim. And I think much of the feedback that we get suggests that we largely get this right. I'm not suggesting we get it right in every instance, but and I think the fact that we do get it right is one of the key reasons why we still continue to grow despite being, as I say, nearly 20 years old. These are just some of the hundreds of comments made recently when we asked our users what it was they most valued about Mumsnet. There's lots of different things there. I don't know if you can see, it's quite small, but I think one of the things that really struck me actually when I read them was how many people saying they valued the honesty of others on there and of getting a different viewpoint and using it to challenge their own thinking. And it kind of struck me because I think in a world where we're now increasingly concerned about echo chambers and social media filter bubbles and the fact that we only really read news from news sources we agree with, I think there's something quite special about Mumsnet that actually people do recognise that because there's this honest and flowing conversation, people do think they are challenged, and that's a helpful thing in parenting for them. It's been mentioned, screen time. So just a few slides on what our users are saying specifically on parenting and tech. You can see from the graph, we know this is of rising concern. I'm told there's been a 47% increase in posts which mention screen time over the last few years. But I think also, our users, and as per the discussion so far, are pretty clear this isn't a one-sided issue. One person, to quote, said, "The generalisation of screens bothers me. Not all content and apps are equal, and how our kids use them vary wildly. So I think, there's a big sense that they're useful, especially when travelling. Talk of apps for teaching kids how to brush their teeth. Many users talk of it making it fun and encouraging kids to do it. Or, even, as the I've mentioned, Alexa, the joy of them asking Alexa what the time is or what the weather's going to be that day, and some of the kind of things that thing. I'm personally not so thrilled about Alexa, I have to say. When I realised the other day that my 2-year-old could turn off my carefully curated playlist for Skimbleshanks the Railway Cat, which I thought was a problem I wouldn't have to face for some years yet, but obviously voice means that they take control even sooner. Anyway, but of course there's concerns about it too. So there's concern that children are losing the magic of books. There's concern about, are we developing our fine motor skills to the same extent? Worry that, social interactions with friends online is not the same as hanging around swings, swapping football cards. And I guess worry that, watching something very innocently on YouTube can very quickly lead to something where they stumble across something, altogether less palatable. And I think, definitely that sense that it's not that easy to work out what the actual research on this says is of growing concern. But to finish, really, I think what this parenting tech issue also demonstrates is the real value of Mumsnet, and how we really do support parents. I think this is a new phenomenon, right? This is an issue we are now facing as parents that we did not face in our own childhoods. And I think ultimately we're all feeling our own way on it. And I think what better way to feel your way on an issue than with the opinions of other parents who are all grappling with the same issue. And it's an anonymous place to post, so you don't need to worry about feeling judged by people who know you. And ultimately, I think the consensus seems to be that it's about moderation. And as with most things in parenting, there's also, it's a useful place to be able to check in when you're worried about crazies. So there was a craze called Momo a few months ago, I don't know if people are aware of, which is about a worry about a site which was creating teen suicides. And people could very easily go on Mumsnet and check, and they pointed out that it was a myth. But also it's used as a place for parents to share inspiration or things to do, things to play. Books to read at different ages, developmental activities to do with younger children. So really that sense that actually, parenting's really hard. It's really hard. But if we're all in it together, we can make it easier, I think.
So we've now got just over 10 minutes for Q&A. We've got lots of questions coming in over Slido. Appropriately enough, I thought I'd share a personal story with you, which is that 20 minutes ago, I got a text message from my daughter's, she's 19 months old, my daughter's nursery, informing me that she's been biting other children today. So I thought it was worth sharing that nudge of me in the digital age. But it also relates to a couple of questions that have come in by anonymous sources. From this audience, just asking, this is directed to Sue, but everybody may have a view on this, which is just the role of fathers as well. So you've obviously you've focused a lot, for obvious reasons, on mothers in their kind of parenting role. Has Mumsnet thought about the role of fathers as well as mothers?
Did I say mums all the way through? Because I was supposed to say parents. Anyway, no.
I think it was somewhat understandable that mums come up quite a lot, given the name of Mumsnet.
We are clear that the mission statement says making parents' lives easier. It's hard to know how many dads are on Mumsnet because they don't necessarily declare themselves. They are somewhat sinisterly known as lurkers. In internet jargon, which means they read rather than post. But we think, 15 to 20% of our users are men, are dads, and certainly we see that kind of increasing. So, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very interesting, especially around some of that stuff I talked about in terms of parental leave and rights. We're increasingly seeing companies realising they have to give leave to dads, and we're part of that conversation as well. So, absolutely, we're there on dads as well, yeah.
Yeah. That's good. So, if you want to come in on this?
I was just going to say that there's Dadsnet as well, isn't there? No, a much smaller platform. But I think it
not
is.
really. We've got a forum which within Mumsnet called Dadsnet, but and over the years, quite a few people have tried to start a Dadsnet, but it's never quite taken off in the way Mumsnet is. So
Okay, yes.
read from that what you will.
Yeah.
Opportunity for somebody out there. I myself am a lurker. I just didn't realise. Just didn't realise that's what people might call me. There are a couple of questions, Stephanie, for you about the what our audience is labelling the Batman effect. And interestingly, it's just about whether you've been looking at older children. Some people have even mentioned the fact that they have, I don't know if anybody wants to identify themselves, been taking exams, for example, at Oxford University in a gown, and whether this might have, it's Nikki at the back there, whether this might have influenced her academic performance. So how far can we take this role?
Yeah, so there is adult research that is consistent with this. One phenomenon is called enclothed cognition. And enclothed cognition means this effect of dressing in a way that is more sophisticated or in line with your goal. So if you're preparing to become a doctor, for example, putting on a lab coat. And there's even a nice experiment by Ghazali and colleagues looking at if you put the same individual, if they're wearing a doctor's coat, they perform better on a measure. If the same coat is described as an artist's smock, they perform more poorly. And so it's this idea of kind of getting into the spirit of the character that can influence things in either direction. So I think there are a lot of applications to older children and adults. You don't necessarily need the prop anymore. We use the props and kind of have the figure like Batman to be a much more concrete reminder for children about the character and kind of getting into character. But older children and adults don't necessarily need that. You can just kind of imagine anyone whom you admire, and the chances are that you'll actually perform the task more efficiently and better.
We had a kind of almost a reverse question in relation to what you were just saying, Stephanie, which is, do we know what might happen if a child's pretend play is of an incompetent character? With that?
So my students, Amanda Grinnell and Julia Vysarova, looked at this question, and the way that we tested this in the lab was because we were trying to think about incompetent characters, and there really aren't many in the media. Most of children's media figures are highly competent characters. So what we did is we presented them with Superman, but some children were assigned to Superman as being Superman, and other children were assigned it was Superman or Elsa, so it was matched to the sex of the child. But in the incompetent condition, we described Superman or Elsa as having a bad day. And so Superman was feeling very weak that day and very incompetent, and he was very slow and so forth. And we kind of gave them a little preamble about Superman having a bad day. And then subsequently, so then they put on the cape, and in that condition, instead of an intact Superman cape, the cape was ripped and torn. And in that case, children actually perform worse on that measure than if they were pretending to be Superman having a good day. So it does seem like you can actually shift this in either direction. It's a good question.
Wow, I wouldn't like to encounter Elsa on a bad day, given what she's capable of on a good one. Fionnuala, there are a couple of questions around socio-economic impacts. I was just wondering, I know this is something you've been thinking about. I don't think you've got results yet, but in terms of like how you're thinking about the texting to parents and the breakdown by socio-economic group, can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Tips by Text project that I spoke about it's geared towards all parents. We're not targeting it towards children who are kind of able of free school meals, but we will do the EF will do sub-analysis at the end. But they're very much, we've been piloting this programme for the past 3 or 4 months in schools, and the way all of the text messages are drafted is keeping that group very much in mind. So the language is very simple, and it's been sense checked by a lot of teachers. Also, EAL is a big factor for us. So the language needs to be as simple as possible and very concise, to the point, plain English. So we've been, Megan and Alice over there have been going through all of the text messages and weeding out any words that we might think are difficult. And again, all of the activities are based on things that happen in the home. So we're not saying to parents who might be less likely to, say, sit down with their child and read to them for 30 minutes. We know that that's probably not going to happen, so there's no point in trying to encourage them to do that. So they're all kind of around very simple activities that happen in the home already. And I think I know that strategy has been successful in the US, but there's no, well, of my knowledge, there's not much evidence of if you sort of tag these activities onto everyday things, is that better than, say, encouraging parents to sit down and read or do certain activities with their children. So I think that'll be an interesting finding.
And actually that last point is something that I think you all touched upon, and there are a few questions about, which is just about this balance between promoting positive use of digital technology and parenting time more generally. I think, Sue, you finished on that. Do you have any kind of more general views on where and how to strike that balance?
I think everyone's just feeling their way on it, really. I think what you said about the fact that it's in the home, and Stephanie as well, that it's in the home, and so, you know, we can't just say we're going to banish this and it's not going to happen. It's just unrealistic. And, you know, frankly, I've been on long car journeys with my 2-year-old. Sometimes it's helpful to get the iPad out and, you know, and that. But it's, as I say, I think what our users would mainly say is it's just about getting that balance right and feeling your way on it. And we're all just trying to navigate that, right?
I think as well, we certainly don't want the message to be that technology is bad, because I think we have some great examples of why it's good, and even there's more research coming out suggesting that when you have parents and children working together on technology, so if it's, you know, they're playing a game on an iPad and the parent is kind of watching over their shoulder, asking questions about it, that's, you know, that brings on a lot of the developmental stuff that we want to encourage. So I think it's almost having an active play in technology as children are working with it.
Do you want to come in on this one? Okay. So I think we're actually sort of coming up to time, but I'm just gonna pick up one last question. There's a question for Stephanie about the side effects of playing a powerful character like trying to fly, but maybe we will. Okay, I think what we might do is just end by and I hope this is an unfair question, but. I'm just quite interested in the advice that you might have for any parents in the audience in this specific area. Any just specific tips that you might have that you want to leave us with, and that I can then take back and implement with my my rogue daughter back home.
I mean, I'm just going to say check out Mumsnet, aren't I?
Great tip.
I guess I would say meet them where they're at. So you wouldn't want to force your 19-month-old to pretend to be somebody. She can't even yet get into the mindset of somebody else yet. She's just figuring out her own identity. And so, and the same thing with, you know, concerns about children feeling too powerful and taking on risky behaviors. You know, we do know that certainly by the age of 3, children have a really good understanding of the difference between fantasy and reality. So it's very unlikely to be, you know, a risk factor. But I wouldn't try to force it on a kid who's not really already showing an inclination toward pretending.
So let me preface this by saying I don't have children. I do have one niece, which is not the same because I can hand her back. But I would say, based on some of the work that we've been doing and the academic evidence that's out there, all of these really simple one-to-one interactions that we probably think are not making a difference definitely are. So the conversations that we have on the bus or on the way to school or when we get in from home, you know, that's all the stuff that we're trying to encourage parents to do, and I don't think everyone realises that that's what's important. So yeah, and even if children are using technology, just asking them what they're doing and how's the game going and are you winning, all these types of things can be really beneficial.
Excellent. So I think all we now need to do is to thank our great panel in the usual way.